Hey guys, it's Vicky, and today I'm here to share with you my thoughts on the books I read in the month of May. I ended up reading 6 books in May and had a really good reading month. Like, this was probably the best reading month I've had all year, and so that's really exciting. So yeah, I had a great reading month, but outside of reading, May was a very sad, strange kind of month. We had a death in our family. My husband's grandpa passed away from cancer right at the end of the month. And then, of course, everything that's going on in the world right now with George Floyd's death, his murder, and the protests and everything. It's just so... And then on top of it, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. It's just so sad. And I'm in a place where I don't know what to do. I have been doing some research because for me, when I am confronted with things that I feel like I don't know enough about or I don't have enough perspective on, I want to find out more. It's just my nature. And so I have been going through the internet and social media to find different books and things that I can read to gain more perspective on what it's like to be Black in America. Because obviously I will never fully understand what they go through on a daily basis. I want to know more because I feel like that's where I can start, is I can educate myself more, and then hopefully I can do more. I don't know, I feel so helpless and but also just so sad. I had posted my June TBR. I just wanted to let you guys know it might change a little bit because I'm finding other things that I might want to read right now that have to do with Black Lives Matter and all that. And there's a couple of read-alongs, buddy reads and stuff that I've been finding on social media that I think I'm going to take part in. So yes, so my June TBR may be a little different by the end of the month. Now that I've gotten that, I've said that, let's go ahead and dive into the good part about May, which was the books I read. Okay, so like I mentioned in the intro, I read 6 books in May. 2 of them, though, I'm not going to talk about in this video because they were 5-star predictions. So I'm going to save them for another video. I'm going to review all of those separately. So I will not be talking about, though I did read it in May, I will not be talking about The Fact of a Body, A Murder and a Memoir by Alexandria Marzano-Lesnevich. Yeah, read this in May, but I'm going to review it later. And then the other one is Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. Okay, so I started off the month by doing a buddy read. Bobby from Bobby Reads Too Much and I both, well, she actually got me this book for my birthday. And she had a copy too, so we decided to buddy read it together. It's a very hyped book right now. And it is The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. This is a horror novel set in the American South where a group of women start a book club, and a new man moves into their neighborhood and they invite him to join the book club. And they realize, well, at least one of them starts to suspect pretty quickly that he might be a vampire. This book was so intense. Honestly, it got a lot darker than I thought it was going to get, but I absolutely loved this book. I had a blast reading this book. I loved that the hero of our story is a stay-at-home mom who, by most people's societal, standards and the way that she has seen in the world, that she's just this woman that does nothing. She's the hero of our story. And I loved that. I loved that, obviously, because I'm a stay-at-home mom and, a mom. And I love that the heroes in this book were women who, by most accounts, yeah, are not valued. And I don't think that it's not that I don't think I'm valued in my everyday life. I'm talking about societal perceptions. So I loved that they were the heroes. And it just made my day to see that. Like I said, this book had some dark moments that I was not expecting to see. I thought it was going to be a lot more fun and maybe action-packed, but there were some seriously intense, creepy moments in this book that really gave me the willies. I thought the horror elements in this were perfect, and I loved how he mixed those horror elements with that kind of southern charm that you expect, that these women who are fighting this demonic creature are also trying to maintain that southern hospitality and that, you know, just that southern niceness and everything, while they're also trying to battle a vampire. I just loved that combination. I thought it was so fun, so cool. Like I said, I think this book had a lot to say about women. And I read the preface, I think it was, or whatever you call it. Not the preface. Or no, the author's note. Where Grady Hendrix basically says, I wrote this book because I wanted to see what would happen if like somebody like my mom went up against Dracula. And that's basically what this story is. And I loved the way he did that story. And so the book has a lot to say about women and the way women are viewed in society, the way women are treated in society, because in this book, the women are not treated very well. Their husbands are complete idiots and treat them horribly. There's nothing good about any of them. And so I know some people might see that as a criticism, but I think he obviously did it purposefully. There was a quote actually in here that I wanted to share. So to give you a little bit of context, one of the characters is talking to another character. So two of the women are talking to each other. And she says, "You think we can't match him? I've had 3 children, and some man who's never felt his baby crown is stronger than me, is tougher than me. He thinks he's safe because he thinks like you. He looks at Patricia and thinks we're all a bunch of sunshine Susies. He thinks we're what we look like on the outside, nice Southern ladies. Let me tell you something. There's nothing nice about Southern ladies." I just loved that. I thought that was great, and that's why I noted it and wrote it down. The other thing that I really liked about this book, that when I went onto Goodreads afterwards and was reading other people's reviews, a lot of the negative reviews, people who didn't like this book didn't like it because they thought it was racist. And so this is an interesting topic, especially right now with what's going on. I have to disagree, I think, with a lot of people that thought that Grady Hendrix was being racist in this book. I don't think this would be too spoilery to say. It might be, but the vampire in here is a white man, and he preys on young black children living in a neighborhood that is impoverished. And that's where he focuses his attentions and his attacks. And so some people reading this book thought that it was racist that he did that. I personally felt he was making a statement about America, that can happen and has happened in this country, where you have a group that is targeted and nobody cares. In this book, these young black children are dying and nobody cares. And I think that's the point he was trying to make, is that people should care. He wasn't being racist. He was pointing out a flaw in our society, but doing it in a horror book, which I absolutely loved, because I absolutely love that about horror, when they take things like things that are going on, real things that are going on in our society, and putting them in this horror lens, but making a statement about it. And this book does that not only with race, but also with women versus men. And so I thought he nailed it, and I loved it. And I highly recommend this book, not only for those aspects, but just the horror aspects alone I thought were fantastic. I loved this book. It's one of my favorites I've read this year, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read another anticipated read for me. This is one that I've been waiting for it to come out since the beginning of the year, and it's Stephen King's new book, If It Bleeds. And this book has 4 novellas in it. Mr. Harrigan's Phone, Life of Chuck, the title story, If It Bleeds, and Rat. And overall, I liked this. I liked all 4 stories. I think I gave all of them 4, geez, hairs on my face. I gave all of them 4 stars, except Rat, I believe, was a 3-star for me. So what I do is I tend to, when I get like a collection like this, I rate all the stories and then do an average rating. So that averages out to a 3.75, so I'm gonna round it up to a 4. My favorite story in here was Life of Chuck, which was the second story. I just loved the The concept was cool, number one, because it's told in 3 acts and the story is told in reverse, kind of like the movie Memento. So I loved kind of that, that kind of different way of telling the story was really interesting. And I just loved what the story had to say about living life to the fullest, and the whole concept that you have this whole world that's living inside of your head, and what happens when you deteriorate and die. I think this story especially was kind of special to me because I was reading it when Austin's grandpa passed away, and he's been sick with cancer. The last year has been really, really hard for him. It had not been pleasant. It kind of gave me a whole different sort of perspective when I was reading it, because I had him on my mind. This was a good collection. I don't always love Stephen King collections. Sometimes there are some real stinkers in his collections, but I thought all 4 of these were good. I also really, really liked the title story, If It Bleeds, because he brings back a beloved character, Holly Gibney, who is in a couple of his books. But I would say if you're going to read this collection and you haven't read The Outsider or the Bill Hodges trilogy, you might want to read those before you read If It Bleeds, because there are some spoilers in there and I don't want you to get spoiled. So just know that going in. But that story was also really great, had a really cool concept, was sort of creepy, and it was interesting and kind of also in kind of a social sort of way, mixing it with like a horror element. So yeah, this was great. Really enjoyed it. 4 stars overall. The next book I completed in May I listened to on audio, and that was Valentine by Elizabeth Wetmore. And this one also left me with a lot of thoughts. And similar to the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, in that, well, let me tell you what it's about first. Let me backtrack. So this book is about a town in Texas, 1976, and it's a oil town. A lot of the men work in the oil fields and things like that, the refineries and all of that, and the women are kind of left to handle everything else. And a 14-year-old girl named Gloria is attacked and raped, and her court case kind of divides the town, almost in like a men versus women sort of way, because the guy is kind of a part of a prominent family. She is, I can't remember if her family was from Mexico. I think her family was from Mexico, her mother was. And there's like racism going on, sexism going on. And this book, I was a little bit surprised by what it ended up being, because I went into it thinking it was going to be more of a like courtroom drama sort of story. And it wasn't really that. It was really about the women in this town and the way that they react to what happened to Gloria, and just kind of gives you a glimpse of their everyday life and what they deal with as women in this town in 1976. And their hardships and the way that they are stomped all over really by the men in the town. And you meet a lot of characters, and that was probably my main gripe about this book, was there are a lot of point of views in here. And though I liked kind of seeing a glimpse into all of their lives, it was a little overwhelming sometimes. Like I'd get to the next chapter and it was a totally different woman who we haven't met yet, and I'm like, oh my gosh, another one. So yeah, like this book, like the Southern vampire book, had a lot to say about women and our experience, and how many struggles we have that we deal with on a daily basis. And I mean, this book, like I said, takes place in 1976 Texas, and you have to really ask yourself, how much has really changed? Has much really changed? So yeah, this book leaves you with a lot to think about in terms of women's rights, in terms of racial divide in our country, the criminal justice system. Yeah, it's a heavy book. It's a heavy book that'll leave you with a lot to think about, but it was really good. Like I said, my only gripe was There was a lot of characters, a lot of point of views. I wish I could have done without a few of them. But overall, yeah, this was a good book, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And then the last book that I read for the month was The Lake House by Kate Morton. This was probably the lightest book I read this month, even though it's not that light of a story. So yeah, I had kind of a dark month, I guess. But this one deals with, like a typical Kate Morton book, there's 2 timelines going on. There's a story going on in the present day, which present day in this is 2003, where this detective is staying with her grandfather, and she's out for a run and she comes across this old estate, and it's very beautiful, overgrown, looks like people haven't lived in it for years. But it's this beautiful estate kind of in the middle of nowhere, and she kind of starts to poke around and ask people about it, and finds out that back in the 30s a family lived there, the Everdanes, what was their last, was it Edivane, that this family, the Edivanes, lived there, and they had this huge party in the summer. And at this party, their 11-month-old son went missing, and he was never found. And so the family, obviously devastated by his disappearance, they left the estate and never returned. And so she wants to find out, more about this mystery and kind of maybe try to figure out what happened to this baby. And so she tracks down a couple of people from that time period, one of which is one of the Edivane daughters, Alice, who is now in her 80s and is a writer. And she tracks her down and tries to unravel the mystery. So overall, this is probably, this is my 3rd Kate Morton book. This is probably my favorite of the 3 I've read, because I loved the mystery in this. I thought it was and again, Kate Morton always does this. Her mysteries are very layered. There's always something more to kind of peel back. And I really loved the layers in this mystery. I was, totally engrossed once it got going. I loved the setting. The estate was called Lenneth, I believe is how, I'll put it on the screen, because it's not spelled like that, but that's how I was pronouncing it in my head. So someone correct me if I was pronouncing it wrong, but I was pronouncing it Lenneth in my brain. And it was so beautiful, just that it was set in the, out in the woods, and there's this big, beautiful lake with an island in the middle of it, all these beautiful flower gardens, and, different little like passageways, and just this big, beautiful house in the middle of nowhere. It sounded so fairy tale-like, also so kind of haunting, because like I said, at the point where our detective character Sadie goes there, it's exactly how it was in 1933 when the family left. And so everything's like preserved and just sitting there. So it's like it's still alive, but everything's dusty and dirty and worn down, and the gardens are all overgrown. But you just know that it was once this beautiful place. I just loved that. I just loved the setting so much. And I think for this one, another reason it has probably now become my favorite Kate Morton is because both of the stories, the past and the present, were interesting to me. Whereas in the other 2, I feel like there was one that didn't interest me as much, that I kind of had to get through to get back to the story I was really interested in. But in this one, both of them I thought were really interesting, and I was totally in it. The only thing is, and this is like always happens to me with Kate Morton, it takes me a while to settle into the story. This one, it was probably about 100 pages before I was like really settled in and wanting to know what was going on. It just, for some reason, it takes me a while to sink into her books, but then once I get in, I'm good. So yeah, this was a good mystery, I think a perfect book to read this time of year. So if you can get your hands on it like now, like in June, especially because the big mystery happens at the end of June. So I feel like June would be a great time to read this if, you're looking for something to read this month. This would be a great time to read this. It just has that sort of late spring, early summer sort of vibe. It's great. So yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. All right, guys, so those are the books that I read in the month of May. Like I said, I had a good reading month, which was very nice. Because let's face it, 2020 has been awful. Let's just be real. This has been an awful year. I wish we could just fast forward to 2021, just skip over the rest of this year. So I just really hope that you guys are hanging in there and taking care of yourself the best way you can. And I hope that you have a good month and that May was kind of good for you despite all this madness. So anyway, that's all I have for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll talk with you soon.